I always say you have to start with reflecting on yourself. Like, what part do I play in this? Really, what you have to do as marketing professionals, be curious. Insert yourself in the business in a curious way. So, what's going on in the business? What does the business need? And then remembering that questions are a place of safety. So, you throw out those questions, you're taking notes, you unpack that. Then you're able to bring in all the other marketing speak, but you're tying it back to what you heard them say. And that's why I always say is you want to come in as a learner, not as an expert. When you come in as an expert, you crush ideas and you miss a lot of really great information that comes at you. This is the best time for you to now, as marketing professionals, to go back and say, I want to come at you from a point of view that I want to know what you're thinking. Help me understand. So go in as a learner, not as an expert.
So thanks again, Nikki, for joining us. I really appreciate your time today. And so I'm glad to have you here because I really could think of no one else to have this conversation with. So, of course, I'm a CMO and I'm very cognizant of the fact that it continues to be a challenge for a lot of leaders in marketing to demonstrate the value that marketing brings to the organization, and in not being able to adequately always demonstrate what that value is. And I like to say, speaking the language of the business, I'm very sensitive to what reputation do marketing leaders bring to the table. And so that's the reason why I thought it would be great to have this conversation with you today, because I'd love for you to do a massive coaching session. It's not just me today.
Yeah, with all marketers, yes.
All marketers, what your thoughts are around how marketing leaders can more effectively communicate, assess how they are landing on others in a way that makes them more effective at what they do. So let's dive into the first question then. As a leadership coach, what are the most common examples that you've seen of communication challenges that leaders have? Because I'm of the view that communication is really the big issue. If there is not a deep enough or an accurate enough understanding of what the marketing function brings, or what I as a marketing leader bring to the table, then I think it boils down to communication. I could be wrong, but what examples, what are the most common examples you see?
Do we have like 2 hours to just talk about this one question?
That would be awesome, right?
It's super interesting because when people come to me for coaching or when we start engaging in coaching, it's very rare. I cannot think of anyone who's come to me to say, I need a coach to help me with my technical issues. That's not the issues that they're dealing with. They're dealing with issues that have to do with what people like to call the soft skills. And I always say we have to take that expression away, because soft skills are the hardest skills. These behavioral skills, these communication skills are the things that are causing the breakdown in our function in the organization. So I would say these all kind of come together, but let's talk about listening. Failure to listen. So oftentimes what you find is leaders are like pushing forward their agenda. You have this really great idea and you have to push it forward and everyone has to hear this. But maybe your intention is to put forward this really creative idea, but what's the impact? And so I'm always saying to leaders, think about, this is your intention. I wish people would judge me by my intention and not my impact, but people are judging you by your impact. So failure to listen, a leader pushing forward his or her agenda, maybe because he or she wants to move it quickly ahead, can cause a certain deafness to what others have to say. And think about it. This is going to create several challenges and gaps. By not listening, you're missing the opportunity to build buy-in. When you do this, if you slow down, think about the change, the shift. Because if I'm rushing, I'm not listening, I'm pushing forward my agenda, what happens to people on the other end? What do? They shut down or they slow down. Yeah. And that's the biggest thing that we often miss. And we're so excited because our ideas are always the best, right? That we keep pushing forward and we forget to take a pause and think about, if I listen better with intention to hear what others have to say, I can create more involvement. But again, a lot of that is really inadvertently we're doing that because we are so either excited about our idea, we've done so much research on it, and or we want to move the idea along as quickly as possible. We shut down others, we don't get buy-in. So that's one. Another challenge is assuming that people understand your words the way you understand them. Do you know what I mean by that? Right? So we have these dialogues in our heads and we think we've got it, so everyone else should.
Sure.
Big miss. Recognizing also that you as a leader have a much broader view and a different perspective from others. That's another piece that we miss. So the type of meetings you're involved in, the type of information you have, sometimes when you go back to the business to deliver what you're looking to do, they might not have been a part of all of that. So again, it's stepping back. It's kind of like Samuel Jackson in, do you remember that movie, Pulp Fiction? Like,
yes.
explain it to me like I'm a 2-year-old or whatever.
2-year-old, yeah.
So sometimes we do have to step back from our brilliance and don't go in assuming that people are at the same level of knowledge. Throwing a lot of jargon at people, throwing a lot of data at people can also shut down people, and again, is going to get in the way of this buy-in, right? You've done your research. You have this amazing depth of knowledge in your specialty. So oftentimes you're not recognizing that others don't have that, right? I remember I'm a big reader, love reading. And I remember the best feedback I got from someone one day was like, Nikki, could you stop saying to me, so you've read such and such, or I'm sure you've read such and such. And I thought that's the best thing you could say. I step back and say, are you familiar with such and such? Have you ever read such and such? And the response is so different, right? Because often we alienate people by throwing out things that we know, and then they feel like people don't want to appear stupid or that they're not part of the being in the know. And again, that creates that shutdown. And another big thing is presence. So look at you and me on this screen right now. All we have is each other to look at. Yeah. So we're focused, we're leaning in. In life, it's very rarely like that. We've got so much going on, so many distractions. I always remember a friend of mine saying that she had this boss who was amazing, but at the same time, so distracted. And she said, I would go in with my list of things that I'm working on, have these really great conversations, but he's not listening to half of it. So once I just threw in, oh, and by the way, I resign. And he was like, uh-huh. And she just kept going. And then she said, did you hear what I said a while back? And then he looked up from his computer and he was like, no, what? She said, I resign, right? So again, that piece about if we're in this conversation, we're going to have a conversation about what's important to the business, what's important to you. You need to be present, fully present. And that's not about necessarily shutting down everything. In this time, we don't have that luxury, but it may be that my cell phone's on, but I'm putting it on vibrate. The reason I have to have it on is I'm expecting XYZ. Or if you can, just turn it off, put it face down. Those little things make a huge difference. And I really say that there are lots of little fixes we can do right away. Like we can ask ourselves, when I'm going to pitch my idea or share my great idea, am I going to be more ready to listen? Ask some curious questions. Otherwise, what happens is you're going to be creating barriers. And again, that might be not your intention, but that's the impact. So always think about intention versus impact when you're trying to push your idea across to others.
Nikki, those are some awesome nuggets. So having identified those areas, then let's say I'm listening or I'm watching this and I want to determine, well, what's my particular issue or issues? And I want to go into some kind of self-assessment mode because we recognize that it's not one size fits all. What you struggle with is not what I struggle with. What would you say would be the top 3 steps that you recommend a marketing leader could take to self-assess what their own communication type challenges are?
Boy, I mean, it's such a great and important question, Kerry, because I think we always talk about awareness precedes change. And in other words, if I'm not aware of what I need to fix, I'm going to be running around like a maniac trying to do different things and making, again, a whole lot of assumptions that are not at all helpful to anyone. And I think one of the keys that I say that is core to my coaching philosophy is that leadership happens from the inside out. So I always say you have to start with reflecting on yourself. Like, what part do I play in this? And how often do we actually take time to assess ourselves? How often do we take time to actually think about what are others, what am I noticing? Are people running away from me? Do people seem to hear what I'm saying, and am I acting on what I'm saying? How often do I actually talk to people? How often do I actually listen to people? You know, when's the last time I've had a conversation with someone and I've learned something that surprised me about myself, right? So these are some things you've got to ask yourself to gain authentic feedback about how you're showing up. So we often do self-assessment. So for me, if I'm going to help someone, the first thing I have to do is check in on their level of self-awareness. And there's a really great researcher, speaker, Tasha Eurich. I don't know. And again, this is something you can put in your show notes. She has a really great TED Talk. She has some really good resources on her site. And she did research on self-awareness. And what she realized is in her results, she came up with that 95% of people believe that they are self-aware, when in reality, 10 to 15% of people are actually truly self-aware. So like, think
Wow.
about this. So obviously, ourselves included, the people around us, the people listening, they're probably saying, yeah, I'm very self-aware. I know myself, right? But let's think about it, people. In reality, 10 to 15% of people are truly self-aware. And the key to that piece is that first, you need to be able to say to yourself, like, honestly, do I really know myself? And challenge yourself to believe that you need to self-assess. And you can do that a number of ways. You can be that person who does a self-assessment. There are lots of free self-assessments. I think you mentioned you use Strength Finder, Kerry.
Yes.
Any other ones that you've used?
Myers-Briggs
Mhm.
and Strength Finder and Extended Disc are the three that I've had the opportunity to interact with.
Right. So the thing that you have to think about is it is uncomfortable. No one wants to believe that they're not perfect. So it's not like anyone walks around saying, oh, I love feedback, give me feedback. Like, we have to acknowledge that really taking a pause and asking people to give us meaningful feedback so we're actually aware. So self-assessment is one way, but we also need to think about what we call 360 feedback. Like, are you getting feedback from people around you? And you can do that formally or informally. One of the cautions I have, though, is if you're that person who doesn't, like, you find that when you ask people to assess or give you feedback and they're kind of quiet and they're like, yeah, you're great, you're wonderful. We know that none of us, no matter how great or wonderful we think we are, we all have some kind of thing that we need to work on. So I always say, when you're trying to get that 360 feedback, if you're not using a formal assessment, like, really kind of have that come to Jesus talk with people in your circles and say, look, I really want to work on, I don't know, it might be, I find that I'm a bit harsh in the way that I ask people to do things, and I want to work on that. I'd love some ideas from you in terms of what I should be thinking about. There's a really great coach called Marshall Goldsmith, and he talks about feed forward. And he says, you know, people don't like feedback because it's like the modern day tiger. It's like really scary sometimes. If someone says to you, can I give you some feedback? Immediately our brains go into protect mode and we start to really get nervous about what's coming. So feed forward is a really great concept. It's not about telling Nikki all the things that she hasn't done well or what she's not good at. It's more like, oh, I'm specifically working on something, and I'm going to give this person 2 or 3 things that they can do to move forward. So I always say practice feed forward with a couple people who you trust and that you can, dip your toe in and see if it works. Brave people may go out to their whole team and ask their whole team. But honestly, you can't start working on anything that's causing a barrier or is a blind spot until you uncover what that challenge is. And then, just like exercising at the gym, You have to put some things in place to start working on those one or two things that are being what we call derailers in coaching, derailing your success, and really understanding that. And the business of personality is so interesting, because what you'll find is when we're at our best, our strengths can sometimes, when we're not at our best, be our biggest, darkest enemies. So a lot of the derailers come out when we're under stress. And think of the stress we've been under in COVID times, when we're really relaxed, or when we are just feeling like people aren't hearing us. And that's when we start to become like Bruce Banner in The Incredible Hulk. I'm dating myself. I don't know if anyone watches the Incredible Hulk anymore, but where all of a sudden you turn around and you become this beast at work. It's just, that's natural. That's how our brain works. But it's knowing when I get triggered, how do I behave? And what are people noticing about me? And the only way to know that is to be that person who's willing to ask people or have people who feel comfortable enough to share that information with you. If you're that person on the phone who's listening, who every time your team tells you they're wonderful, who every time you ask your friends what they think about you, they say you're great, go back and challenge, but be more specific around it. Say, look, I was listening to this podcast. I was thinking that I can't really be great, and I really do want to do better. So please give me something that I can work with. What do you think about my XYZ? Give me 2 or 3 things I can work on.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I was going through a leadership development program with my company, and they had teamed me up with a coach, a leadership development coach, much like yourself. And his advice at the time, which was awesome, was scary, but awesome. He gave me an exercise to go and ask for feedback. But what he said specifically, he said, Kerry-Ann, find the persons in your organization who you believe are your biggest critics. So these are the people who maybe when you're doing a presentation, they're the ones probably tuned out the most or rolling their eyeballs or what have you. And he said, go to them and ask them. In fact, start with your strongest critic first and get to the easier ones, because he says the strongest ones are the hardest ones to have the conversation with. And it was so enlightening. It was scary, because he said, basically, you're going to the person, you're saying, look, I'm making myself vulnerable to you right now. I want to be better at what I do.
Yeah.
And I noticed perhaps, in the last presentation that I did, I didn't really seem to get that you were understanding what I was saying, or you may have had some concerns. And generally, what feedback do you have for me to improve, to grow, to develop? And it was such a rich time of conversation, because not only did I find out that they weren't necessarily as against me as I thought, which is a whole other discussion, but they were so open and frank about things that I needed to change. And what I recognized was I had a serious PR problem, and there were behavioral issues and communication issues that I needed to address that impacted how I was landing on them. And so I got such rich information, and certainly just to add to your recommendation about getting that feedback, that if it's not from the people who tell you you're great, but hey, start with your biggest critic, why not?
Well, I mean, like, how brave of you to do that. And I'll be perfectly honest, like, one of the things that I want to encourage people to do is think about, like, how much trust do you feel that you have on your teams and in the business? And a lot of that is easily identified by whether, as you said, people are rolling their eyes, look like, and sometimes that's the assumptions we're making. But one of the things I would say is sometimes we know and we just keep suppressing it. We ignore the signals and we just keep going forward. And I always use a really great example. I remember, again, Marshall Goldsmith, who I love, when he was talking about feed forward, and he was like, some of the things you can say to people is, how can I be a better XYZ? How can I be a better marketer? How can I support your business better? And I remember coming home one day saying, okay, I'm going to ask my husband, how can I be a better wife? And I looked at him, I came in, I was exhausted. I looked at him, I was about to ask it. And then I was like, you know what? I don't want to ask that right now, because there's going to be so much work to be done. So I'm going to take a pause on that question for now. But that's the other thing that keeps us from doing it. So to your point, this is why when you get self-awareness, you now have to action plan around, like, what am I going to do in order to move forward? So what you did there is that step of really trying to discover. so that you have some things to work on. But don't let the fact that you're like, okay, once I ask these questions, there's actually work to be done. And when the work does surface, you got to do the work. Or again, you lose credibility because they've gone and given you these really great suggestions and you've done nothing with it, or you've shot it down. You just say thank you and you take those notes, and then you come back later, maybe after you've digested it, and you start say this, because of you, I've really realized I need to do X, Y, Z. And that's how you create that culture of being able to create more comfort on your teams and in your organization, is that culture of feedback by doing things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what I know it did for the other person is that they felt more open to give me feedback going forward, even in the moment.
Absolutely.
So if there's something that she was picking up and she just used the moment to maybe send me a DM or WhatsApp or an email, is everything okay? I realize you were particularly quiet in this meeting, that sort of thing. And it's been great.
And that's how you create, as Brene Brown would call it, your truth tellers. Like the people that you know that when you're ready to try out something, you can trust that they're going to tell you exactly what you need in order to accelerate your progress, right? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, awesome stuff. So let's get to the heart of what I think, or I believe to be the biggest issue that's impacting marketers. There is a thinking that marketing just really has not been able to demonstrate to the business how they give a return on investment. So we can call it marketing ROI. It's a credible point, because at the end of the day, what we're talking about when we spoke about communication is the fact that the business is speaking one language and then marketing is speaking another sometimes. And the language of the business is dollars and cents. Let's just keep it real. The language of the CEO and the CFO in particular, and the language of sales is usually a dollars and cents conversation.
That's right.
And so my question to you is, what do you recommend marketing leaders need to do or take as a first step as they prepare to understand the language of the business so that they can communicate more effectively with them?
Yeah, and it's a great question, Carrie. And again, as an HR professional, we're the fluffy people. So we also have to figure out, how do we insert ourselves so that the business actually really sees that we're adding value. And it's funny because I'm in a new role. I joined an organization. My boss was the corporate secretary. So she's straight from the business, legal. And every time we talk about HR stuff, she's like, I know what it was like being in the business. Please let that language be more down to earth. Let's not talk about all this fluffy stuff. And it's exactly that, is that really what you have to do as marketing professionals, be curious. Insert yourself in the business in a curious way. And again, it goes back to having those strong listening skills and like being genuinely curious. So what's going on in the business? What does the business need? What are you looking for? And then remembering that questions are a place of safety. So you throw out those questions, you're taking notes, you're really trying to understand what they really are looking to do. You unpack that, then you're able to bring in the click conversation and all the other sort of marketing speak, but you're tying it back to what you heard them say. And that's why I always say is you want to come in as a learner, not as an expert. When you come in as an expert, you crush ideas and you miss a lot of really great information that comes at you. So a lot of the time that I spent, especially joining an organization in the midst of a pandemic, is really talking to people in the business. What are you looking for? What are your pain points? What are you going to need from us? How can marketing support you in order for you to achieve what you're looking to achieve? Super important. Times like this, since the COVID-19, have been a lot more authentic. People are opening up a lot more. You know, there's my kid in the background. There's my kid showing up in Zoom calls. So now is even the best time. Like, what a great time for you to launch a podcast like this. This is the best time for you to now, as marketing professionals, to go back and say, I want to come at you from a point of view that I'm really curious. I want to know what you're thinking. Help me understand, what do I need to do as a marketing professional to support you better? So go in as a learner, not as an expert. Questions are a place of safety. Let's not crush ideas. Let's take it away and come back. So, I mean, that's pretty much it for me. I always say what I've really realized in my career journey and my coaching journey and working with different types of individuals culturally, from a business culture perspective, as well as just a total, like I've lived in different countries. So even just from a cultural perspective, you come in with curiosity, you learn that language, you share what you have in a more collaborative way, you get the buy-in so much better. And I'll give you a really simple analogy. I lived in South Korea for 3 years. And I always remember when I got there in the first year, I thought I was going to learn the language by osmosis. That didn't happen. So I enrolled myself in a language school and I started to learn the language. And the more I spoke that language, the taxi drivers would take me to the best places to eat. The people I would meet would take me to places that no one else knew. You become an insider by truly speaking the language of that culture. You become an insider by speaking the language of the business. So I took that example from being in Korea for 3 years and realizing the shift in year 1 to year 2 by learning the language, to when I'm in an organization, I really try to understand, really try to learn, try to understand who are the people. And work is like high school. Who are your popular kids in the business? Get to know them, get to know what they need, get their support, and you're golden.
Yeah.
You're golden, honestly.
Yeah. I totally identify with that, because the minute that you go and you seek them out and you express that willingness to really understand and to meet them where they're at and to deliver in a way that satisfies their objectives as well, then it really opens the door to tremendous possibilities. Now, I'm sure there's some folks that are listening who probably are at a place where, boy, I think I'm at a bit of a crisis point, though. I mean, is there such a thing as a crisis point? What is it that I can look out for as an indicator that I'm at a crisis point where my reputation and my ability to communicate and how I'm landing on people are concerned?
Oh, for sure. People aren't inviting you to meetings.
Yeah,
that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Your ideas are often being rejected. Stuff is happening around you and you aren't part of the discussion. You're the last to know. I think oftentimes, as we said before, we see these signs, right? It's like I think of some leaders who are so horrible in organizations that it's only until the organization says, I'm giving you a coach or you're out, or I'm doing this or you're out, before they actually start to acknowledge that all along the signs were there, but they were ignoring those signs.
Yeah.
So again, you do a scan of your environment. You take note of what people are saying or not saying.
Yeah.
Like when you walk into a room, what are you seeing? What's happening? So it's about being more intentional in being clear on what's going on around you. There's a really great personality assessment that we use. It's a psychometric called the Hogan. And Dr. Hogan is a very interesting character. And again, I can give you for your show notes. And he has these different types of assessments. And one of them is actually called the dark side of personality. And he talks about the fact that our dark side often emerges when we're under pressure, when we're too comfortable, when we're really trying to get our points across. And it's a dark side that often we find will get people fired, right? It's the dark side of personality to get really technically strong people in a place where their team puts up their hand and says, we can't work with this person anymore. So again, it goes back to the point of if you're noticing people are either very not giving you responses or people are very short in responding to you, look for some signs. Look for how you're being, how many people have questions at the end of your presentations, whether people come to you in the hallway or not, that we get to do that often anymore in this COVID time, but Kerry, right?
Yeah, totally. So having reached that point, then what do you recommend they do? So we have a crisis, Houston, or we have a problem. What do they do at that point?
Yeah, it goes back to being vulnerable. Yeah, Brene Brown, right? We got to be vulnerable. And you know what? At the end of the day, I've seen it play out so many times. I've worked with the leaders who have reached a point where I always have a box of tissues that I carry around when I go to coaching assignments, and people laugh and they're like, why do you have those box of tissues? And I'll say, You'll see. Because at some point, when people get to that place where they realize, I have done so much damage, I don't even know where to begin. It begins with you saying that to people. It begins with you saying, you have to be that brave person. It doesn't feel good to say, Kerry, I suck. But it is going to be that door opener to create the trust. Because really what you're essentially having to do is to rebuild or build trust if the trust was never there. And building trust is super hard. So what it means is that you actually have to fix your reputation. That's really the key. You know, I had a leader who was amazing. He used to always say to me, let's have a reputation check-in every couple of weeks. You check in on my reputation, what you're hearing, what you're seeing, I'll do the same for you. And it was amazing because, again, I go back to intent versus impact. I don't think anyone gets up in the morning and says, I'm going to be that person that nobody invites to a meeting. I'm going to be that person who doesn't have the best idea in the room. But what happens is our intention is to do great work. But sometimes the impact is we destroy relationships. And once those relationships are destroyed, the only way to rebuild them, and we see a lot of politicians doing these things, is you just get up there and say, I did wrong, and I need to do better. Use some feed forward and say, look, I know that now I need to work on this. Is there anything I'm missing? And what 2 or 3 things do you recommend can help me to be better at XYZ? You'll be amazed how people will actually come around. And again, I always say, if you're not really sure, some people are really bold. They'll go up in front of their entire team and do that. But if you don't feel that you have that ability, and again, it depends on your work culture as well. Some work cultures really encourage that and others don't. You may go in front of your whole team and say, look, this is what I've come to realize, and I'm working on this. I'd like to talk to each of you individually, and I really need your help. Right? They say one of the most powerful words in the English language is I need, because people want to help. So I recognize XYZ, I need your help. I'd love to do some one-on-ones with each of you just to help me be better, to be able to serve you better and to serve our clients better, whatever. So it's really about Brené Brown, vulnerability and just owning it, right?
Yeah. And by being vulnerable, what you're also doing is creating a safe space for people to feel safe with you. Totally. That they too can be open, that they can give you feedback, and at the end of the day they understand what your intentions are. Because if you don't create that kind of a safe space, then you're not going to get through. And they will.
I mean, you know, like preach, Kerry, preach. That's exactly it. It's like, it's created, you know, we hear about psychological safety. And again, that's another thing. As leaders, you have to educate yourself about the soft skills. You have to be intentional about understanding, what does that psychological safety mean? What does that matter? What does a growth mindset mean? Why does that matter? These things matter because they help you be even better or to be well received. So yeah, your data is important, your research, your number of clicks and likes, those things are super important, but it's about how you package it. At the end of the day, you're dealing with human beings and you're dealing with social interaction, right? Yeah. And we know every time we're interacting with people, we're auditing. People are auditing you. They're doing a little assessment. Do I like how this person sounds? Do they blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it really is important for you to really be honest about what you're good at and what you're not doing so good at. And the only way to know that is to find out from others and create that safety so that it's ongoing. Like I always say, be persistent. If the first time you go in front of your team and they're still not giving you, just keep going back and say, look, remember, I really mean it. I really want to do this. And you will see shifts, honestly.
Yeah. Great. So I think this aspect of the conversation is a great segue into our next question, because I was having a coaching conversation with one of my colleagues. And the nugget that she shared with me is that she said, Kerry-Ann, look, you are always focusing on how you deliver your work. What are your KPIs? Are you hitting your targets? Are your objectives being achieved? And you have to recognize that the establishment and the fostering of relationships in the organization in that particular work environment was actually what was going to be the positive impact that I would have needed on my own reputation at the time. So essentially her advice was it's about recognizing the role that relationships, business relationships play in your ultimate success, your ability to communicate, your ability for people to see you the
Yeah.
way they need to see you for you to grow. Now, for those people listening, what role, if any, does fostering of healthy relationships in business with your colleagues, your peers, people up the stream, down the stream, what role does that play in the whole equation of your whole reputation management strategy, as it were?
It's super important. And as I told you, I had a former leader who was amazing, and part of his, like our relationship was always about the reputation piece. So let's guard each other's reputation. And one of the things that I always remember him saying to me is ask, what are people saying about me? And it's not about, that expression our parents would tell us, what other people have to say about you is none of your business, right? It's not about a gossip perspective, but it's like, for example, even people who are amazing at what they do, they don't even know they're amazing at what they do because they do it so effortlessly that sometimes they're just thinking everyone else does this. Just conversely, people who are like making roadkill of people, they have no idea the damage they're doing sometimes because they're just not paying attention to signs and what people are saying. So I say all of this to say that we have to really be clear about the relationships that we're building, and not from we have a big thing that we talk about all the time is reciprocity, And if you think about it, like anytime I go to Costco and I come home with something new, the reason I have that is because there was a sampler who gave me something to try. And after I tried it, I kind of felt like I should go and look at this box that he gave me the sample for. And I go, and then he's looking at me, and I think, I'm going to take this box home. If that person wasn't there, I would have never picked up that box of nachos. But because I sampled it, I feel the brain is wired to want to give back to people who give
Yeah.
to us. So I say all of this to say that someone who's had to do a lot of networking in her career, that's me, in order to get to where I am and where I'm going to, it's been through extensive reputation checks and relationship checks and reciprocity, not just taking from people, but always saying, what can I do for you? How can I help you? Thank you for helping me with this. Please let me know what I can do to support you. But it's like a lot of the times we're so busy stepping around people or stepping on people to get to our ultimate objective that we forget that really what we're in the business of doing, or should be in the business of doing, is creating meaningful reputations. One of the good examples I always use, well, good or bad, but when you drive behind a garbage truck, sometimes you don't even, you turn a corner, the garbage truck is gone, but what do you smell? What do you
Ooh.
smell? Garbage, right? So
Yeah.
you knew that garbage truck was there. That scent stays behind for a while, right? Then flip the switch to a guy that we knew who, when he would leave a room, he wore a certain cologne, and people would come in and go, oh, Armando was here. Where's Armando, right? Armando left behind a beautiful scent. And that's the scent that you want to be thinking about. Do I leave behind the scent of Armando, or do I leave behind the scent of a garbage truck, or in between? But it's really being clear again on what is my reputation, because it matters. It does. Because are you hurting people or are you enabling people? We're put on this earth to do good. So start to really care about the signals that you're getting from people, the messages that you get, and think about whether you feel you should act upon it or not, right? The analogy that we all know about the scorpion and the frog. So remember that story about The scorpion wants to get across the river. He says to the frog, "Can I jump on your back?" And the frog says, "No. If you jump on my back and I take you across, you'll kill me." And the
Yeah.
scorpion says, "I will not do that. I want to get across." So the silly frog says, "Sure, jump on my back." And halfway through, they're crossing the river. The frog feels a sting. He looks back at the scorpion. He says, "Why did you do that?" And the
Mhm.
scorpion says, "I can't help it. It's in my nature."
Nature, yeah.
Like what we say in Jamaica, so me stay, right? But the reality is, you have a sting. We all have a sting. So what do I need to hold back in order to get across the river? It's my sting. So you need to identify, I'm going to sound very repetitive, but you have to identify what are the things about your personality that can be like a sting to somebody. And when is it not serving you? So when do I need to hold back in order to get across the river? And also, what do I need to do to thank that frog for taking me across the river? What do I need to do or show the frog that I care? And that's how you build a great reputation. It's reciprocity, and it's also awareness and acknowledgement. So even if you do make mistakes, your sting does come out, you go back and say, "Look, I realized I did such and such, mea culpa, and I was wrong to do that." And then again, it's like really about it really, you'll be amazed at things that really, there's another TED talk I'm going to give you for your show notes where
Okay.
Drew Dudley talks about leadership. We're all leaders. And again, it's about, he calls it, I think it's lollipop moments. I'll send that to you. But it's like
Mhm.
the impact we have on people lingers for ages. So
Yeah.
think about, is it the scent of Armando? Is it the scent of the garbage truck? What am I putting out there when I walk in a room and when I leave a room? And what
Yeah.
reputation do I want to have? So again, I think all in all, Kerry, I would say it's about being intentional and starting to read signs a lot better than
Yeah.
maybe we
Yeah.
did before. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm sure our listeners, having listened to this conversation, they're like, okay, so
Mhm.
there's some things I could work on, or maybe the situation could be worse than I'd anticipated. What would you recommend at this point would be the key takeaways that a marketing leader can implement today
Mhm.
to improve how they're communicating and landing on others in a way that strengthens their reputation?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to my favorite, self-awareness. How self-aware are you? How well have you been listening or noticing what others are saying about you? Start there. Who are one or two people that you can go to right now to ask for some precise feedback? And again, practice feed forward if you're that person who just really is not really ready for feedback. So practice feed forward. Ask for 2 suggestions for the future that can help you achieve what you're hoping to work on. But I always say, if you haven't done any assessments, don't feel like you need to go pull out a whole bunch of assessments, but start with asking people, reflecting on some of the things that people have been maybe saying about you and you've been brushing off, which we tend to do a lot. But if you've heard things over and over again, then start to think about it. Could this be a strength or could this be a derailer? And then really try to find a couple people that you can safely go to and know that they're your truth tellers. Don't go to people who are going to tell you what you want to hear, in order to start that path of relationship strengthening or building, depending on where you are on the spectrum. But you have to really step into some discomfort and be courageous and say, I'm going to step into some discomfort this week and I'm going to get some real valuable feedback to understand how I'm being perceived. I'm going to start working on some things. Yeah.
I love that. It does take courage. It can
Yeah.
be pretty uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but from personal experience, I'd add that it's really been an enriching experience. Just really putting yourself out there, being
Absolutely.
authentic, taking the risk. And while you may encounter people unfortunately, whose intentions may not be probably what you would otherwise want them to be, at the end of the day, every one of those experiences can still work to build you up, because it gives you information that you can use to determine what shifts you need to take, however small,
Yes,
uh, and put it out there, and
absolutely.
just really to make that reputation shift.
Yeah.
Nikki, this has been such an awesome conversation. It's been so rich. It's been so enlightening. You've been done such an awesome job of giving us some great nuggets and pouring into us today.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would like to tell us about how we can support you?
I could talk about this forever, Carrie. So I'm really grateful. And then I'm always like thinking, oh, I should have told them this, I should have told them that. But I would love if you do have questions from viewers to either feel free to channel them towards me, or to sort of maybe we come back and have like just a Q&A session with you. But for me, it's all about giving back. I really am that person who believes in giving back. I do a lot of research. I am really passionate about this area of helping to be better leaders. So how you can help me is, as I said before, if there are any questions or even sort of comments about, I don't agree with this or that, bring me back to explore deeper, because I think it's hard in 45 minutes to really get people to understand the impact of how quickly they can turn things around and make much more of an impact with the business if they just change one or two things. And even though we say one or two things, it can take, I work with people for a year, 2 years sometimes. Sometimes it's 3 months. It varies for people. So,
Yes, yes.
yeah.
And the easiest way to find you, I know I always keep in touch with you on LinkedIn. Is that
Yes.
the easiest way to find you? What's the easiest way to find you for those people who would want to
Yeah.
engage you somehow?
I am on LinkedIn. People send me messages all the time and I do respond to them. LinkedIn, definitely. Yes.
Awesome, great.
Well, thank
All
you.
right, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Really appreciate your time, Nikki.
Well, thanks for having me. This was awesome, and stay safe.
Thank you, you too. You too.
Okay.
Take care.
So join us next time and we'll continue to flip the marketing conversation right here on the Internal Marketing Podcast. The Internal Marketing Podcast is available on your favorite podcasting app.